Welcome to this mini-series of the Inside Knowledge podcast for people with IBS about managing your digestion all through our lifetime. I'm taking a different focus on the stages of our lives each week, from supporting your child with IBS through the teenage years, 2 episodes for women about pregnancy in the postpartum stage and then the menopause, and finishing up with IBS in older people. Last week, episode 85 was all about children. Today is teenagers and moving away from home. Teenagers are different from children, and this can affect their digestion. There's huge changes in hormones, experimenting maybe with more self-autonomy, choosing their own meals, buying their own food. This can really affect IBS. So whether you're a young person or the parent of one, this episode should help you get better digestion. Hello and welcome to episode 86 of the Inside Knowledge podcast for people with IBS. I'm Anna Mapson. This week is all about teenagers, and as the parent of 2 teenagers or tweens and teenagers, I know that things start to change a little bit with what they will eat, what is acceptable, also just a lot more freedom, moving into having control over their money, having control over their food. Maybe going to secondary school for the first time. It's not the same as at primary school where teachers are sitting with you, checking that you've eaten, looking what you've actually eaten and reporting it back. It's completely different as they start moving outwards from the home and probably spending more time away from home as well, either at friends' houses or hanging out in fast food places. So that can have significant implications for people who've got a very sensitive digestion. But some teenagers with IBS may struggle with this change of lifestyle, change of freedoms, and also all the other normal things that are difficult as a teenager as well, like changing body shape, changing body size, maybe big influx of hormones that can really affect your mental health, changes in teenagers' sleep cycles as well, which is really well documented. So there's so many things that kind of come together to make this a particularly difficult time if you've already got IBS. If you, as a teenager, or if you're the parent of a younger person, if these symptoms are new, the advice that I always give, still stands. That would be, if your symptoms are new and you seem to be getting digestive issues that you haven't had before, it is worth going to the doctor. It's not just IBS. They need to rule out a whole host of other conditions. But apart from that, the reasons for getting IBS as a teenager are much the same as they would be for anybody else. So I'm not going to go into all of that again, but I do have episodes on the causes of IBS. Episodes are 47 for the causes of IBS, episode 33 all about common constipation causes, and episode 10 about post-infectious IBS. One of the big changes that marks becoming a teenager or an adolescent is big surges in hormones, and that can have a really big impact on digestion. Typically, we think quite a lot about female hormones and their role in digestion, and I've done a couple of episodes on periods in IBS, but actually I found a few studies particularly showing that testosterone levels in boys with IBS may also have an impact. In a very small study, they took 38 people with IBS and compared them against 20 healthy controls, and the boys, or the young men who had IBS, had slightly higher levels of testosterone. They tended to have more instances of IBS the higher these hormones were. But other studies have found that people who have higher testosterone levels tend to have less IBS. So it's a bit of a mixed picture, I would say, with male hormones and IBS. But we do know with women's hormones that estrogen and progesterone definitely affect bloating, constipation. So typically in the run up to a period, you're getting slower down digestion. Then the release of the menstrual blood will often come with diarrhea and cramping, excessive gas, maybe water retention. In the first few years of a girl's menstrual cycles, they may be irregular, they may be heavy for some people as well. So kind of dealing with all of that, plus the digestive discomfort that can also accompany it, can be really, really challenging if you are just getting to grips with how your body's changing growing up. It's also really difficult to, alongside that, have digestive issues. The other thing that happens as well in some teenagers is that you get a real burst of growth hormone. When they get to like 13, 14 years old, they get really tall and definitely are growing. Now that growth requires fueling. It requires you to eat protein to manage your bone health and muscle growth and, keeping strong and also keeping yourself fueled for all the activity. But that can lead to overeating on certain foods because you're really hungry, so you want to eat more. And then if you've got a sensitive digestion, and you've probably heard in this podcast me talk a lot about the low FODMAP diet, where there are certain foods that may be less well tolerated in people who have a sensitive digestion. So things like beans and pulses, maybe large amounts of wheat, large amounts of lactose from dairy, maybe other fruits like apples. So those, if you eat them in high quantities and you're sensitive to them, and you're eating more because you're very hungry, that could also be triggering your digestive symptoms. The other alternative to that is that if you don't eat enough, then sometimes being overhung can also trigger bloating in some people, and that might be down to excessive stomach acid. It can also be down to cramps from not eating enough, or just maybe eating the wrong foods that suit your body. I'm making a lot of generalizations here, and not all of this will apply to all teenagers, of course, but there could be more exposure to processed foods, experimenting with alcohol, maybe more caffeinated drinks like energy drinks. It's really common in teenagers to be doing this, maybe skipping meals. I know a lot of people I've worked with who either have kids, or they have worked with some teenagers who are in school as well. They skip lunch in the canteen and prefer to socialise with their friends because the line is too long in school. And I know that my kids sometimes do this as well. When people get access to their own money, maybe they can walk to and from school, they're getting the bus themselves, they're buying sweets a bit more, maybe buying those energy drinks or coffee in order to give them a little buzz and a little boost. Then the next stage, as teenagers get older, like maybe you're experimenting a bit more with alcohol, maybe even drugs, smoking, vaping. These all have an impact on our digestion as well. I've got an episode about alcohol and IBS, which might be very interesting to look at. But other things that can affect your digestion is just that sort of erratic nature of eating, skipping meals. Then when you do eat, the meals may be higher in saturated fats, things like burgers and chips, or also quite high in sugar, and potentially less foods like broccoli and carrot. They're just standard vegetables. As I said, I'm really generalizing, and I know some teenagers are super healthy and do not have those problems. But in the main, maybe it's just the ones that I've come into contact with tended to gravitate much more to fast food. That is a consideration as well, is how your diet is actually matching your growth needs. So you've got increased growth needs, increased hormone fluctuations, and potentially less healthy food going in. Now, if you're a parent of a teenager, you might be thinking, well, there's nothing I can do about it. And I sometimes feel like that myself, if I'm completely honest. I am a nutritional therapist. This is all I do, and talk to people about healthy food and diets and how to stay well. And my own kids don't take my advice. So I fully empathise with any parents who are going through this situation. I think it's best to think about what we talked about last week in terms of the toddler stage, that they do go through this natural phase of eating beige foods, eating quite bland foods when they're 1, 2, 3. Then what might happen when they're a teenager is they go through this phase where they're rebelling a bit, changing what's common at home, changing what's different, and trying to be their own person. And that can play out in food and eating as well. And I think it's quite helpful to just have the same approach that I suggested last week, which is keep on offering healthy food, keep on making meals and presenting options, and talk to them about it. Obviously, teenagers can get a lot more involved in food preparation and helping out around the kitchen. But also just know that it's probably just a phase and it's not the end of the world. However, we also know that in early teenage years is particularly a risk area for eating disorders or disordered eating habits to begin. So it's very common, particularly in girls, but we're seeing more of a rise in boys' eating disorders as well. The development of eating disorders is not just down to going on a restrictive diet when you're a teenager, but it can be one of the triggers that you just want to be aware of. So where for some people with IBS, you might say, yes, try the low FODMAP diet. This is a tried and tested diet. Just knowing that if you as a young person or you're the parent of one, at this stage in your life, it can be the time when your body's changing, your emotions are changing, your life is changing. And so to add another layer of really obsessing about food and a lot of food rules just might not be the best thing for your long-term relationship with your body, with food and with eating. However, I also see the other side of it, that it can be possible to understand what the FODMAP diet is and then potentially reduce some of those highest FODMAP foods, like the frequency of wheat, for example, the diversity in the fibres that you're getting. These are still helpful things to think about, but I don't always think it's helpful to put in a very restrictive, rule-bound diet at the time that your body's changing and that you're really struggling with digestive issues, because there could be an increased risk of disordered relationship with food and with your body, I would say. But it is also worth acknowledging that a younger person may feel a great deal of embarrassment and shame about their body that kind of isn't playing by the rules. So not only have you got hormonal changes, things are happening, growing, changing, and your digestion's not playing ball. So perhaps you're feeling more bloated, or you're fasting in school and people might notice, or there could be a whole range of reasons why you suddenly feel like your body is not doing what it should do or what you've been able to trust it to do in the past. And that can be very disorientating and worrying. And that's why it is helpful to get a doctor to just confirm that it is IBS, and then you can think about what it is that you want to do about it. Some of the key tools that you can use that are very helpful is the IBS Diet and Symptom Tracker, which you can download off my website. I'll put the link in the show notes. This is something where you can start to track and notice your own digestive patterns, start to understand a little bit more about your own body. But also you might like to focus on the gut-brain connection. So anything that can help you calm down that nervous system, just really support yourself, because there is a lot going on when you're a teenager. Not only are your relationships changing, your hormones are changing, your body is changing, but also you've got exams maybe at school. There could be additional pressures that you maybe don't feel ready for, or things that people are encouraging you to do that maybe you don't want to do. And so it's a very confusing time. Learning how to support yourself through the mental challenges that life is going to give us is really helpful. This is where practicing breathing is helpful, and you can look at my episode on breathing for IBS. I'll put a link in the show notes that gives some specific tips on how to do that, to calm down your body using your breath, but also to do things that also make your body feel good. So focusing on exercise, really trying to work on those basic healthcare things that we should all be doing. Eating more fruits and vegetables, like eating regularly, not skipping meals, but going to bed on time. Like that's another area that teenagers can be classically bad at, is sleeping. So wanting to stay up later and also to sleep in later. And of course, this is really challenging because teenagers have to get to school by a certain time, and they don't really allow for this change in body clocks. Like, it's known that our chronobiology changes as we get to this phase of life. It is natural that teenagers want to sleep in a little bit more and don't wake up as early as they used to. Often chronically sleep deprived because you're staying up late. So those kind of things that you can just get to bed a little bit earlier, like, can make a big difference to your food choices the next day, and also to how you feel about your body and your digestion. Sleep is so restorative and calming. When we're very tired, we can be more anxious. We can also feel pain more. So if you suffer with tummy aches and digestive issues, then that can feel a lot worse when you're tired. You feel less resilient and able to cope with those kind of things. But also, like, your mood changes. You feel more irritable, like you can't bear to be around people. You snap, maybe feel irritated. Those things all can be helped by getting a better night's sleep. And if you need to understand a bit more about sleep, I also have an episode about sleep and IBS. I also wanted to start talking about what happens as you get even older and perhaps you're moving away from home. So people going to university, maybe moving in with some friends into a shared house. This changes everything because you are 100% in charge of your own meals, your own shopping, maybe for the first time ever. And again, bit of a generalization, but it's possible that at this time you might not be focusing as much on the core nutrition basics, like maintaining your protein levels, making sure you're hitting your fruits and vegetables every day. These things might go out of the window. What you can do in order to try and prepare, to try and help yourself with your IBS, is focus on adding to your diet. I worked with somebody who was at university last year, and he felt really stressed out by coursework. The levels of anxiety were quite high. Living in a shared house is not always easy, particularly if you don't always get on with everybody who you're living with. So maybe you're worried about using the bathroom that other people are using. Maybe you don't have much space to store your own food. This was a big problem for him. They had one fridge for about 6 or 7 people. They didn't have very much space, so you can't really batch cook to make ahead foods that would be healthy and nutritious, which you could if you had your own home, because you don't have much freezer space. There's no place to store batches of food. And so you have to cook everything each night quite often and to prepare foods day to day. And that's challenging when you're really busy and you've got a lot of work to do. So some of the things you can think about is very simple, quick to make foods that you can make with little prep time, which are ideally things like stir fries. They're so easy. Noodles, which take a matter of minutes, and you can use things like instant noodles, super noodles, those kind of products that have their own flavorings, or just get instant quick cook noodles. Sometimes they're ready cooked and you can just put them in the wok with the vegetables. Then you're just going to cook in some vegetables and your protein, and that can be made in a matter of minutes, really. Then it's thinking about, okay, so if you are having some ready meals, some packaged food, is there a way that you can just boil a little bit of broccoli and add it on the side? Or you can have an apple after your meal, or have a banana, or have some berries with your porridge. Like, what can you add to your food intake that is going to really support your health longer term? I know that money is a real challenge at this time as well, which is why batch cooking would be ideal. Depends how you get on with the rest of your housemates or people that you're living with as to whether you feel comfortable to cook with them as well. But cooking together can really save money because you are able to bulk buy. So cooking for one every day can be quite challenging, and I know it's tricky. What I would say is, if you're moving to a different city or you're going to university, for example, think about what you can take with you to help your IBS symptoms. So make sure you've got all the supplements and things you get over the counter that help, like whether it's anti-diarrhea tablets or laxatives. Make sure you've got a little stash of those. Make sure that you have a few simple recipes that you can cook up your sleeve, such as stir fries. Like, do you know how to make a simple soup, for example? These can be really nourishing, and actually you might be quite popular if your housemates know that you can cook, and you can share that information with them too. Make sure if you're moving far away from home that you have registered with a doctor as well, and check out where your local pharmacies are, because they will be very helpful. And when you're feeling ill, you don't want to have to try and register for a doctor or anything like that. So try to make sure that you've got medical support set up on campus in the university or at a local doctor's, or at least you know where a local walk-in centre is if you're not going to register in the new location. Also think about which foods you know are your safe foods that you generally get on really well with. So whether it's things like plain rice, chicken, maybe some eggs, make sure that you have those in the cupboard, that you take a little stash with you when you move out, and that you are able to just cook those foods that you know are going to be comforting. So when you do get a flare up, you've got the things that you need that you've always had at home, because the parents have always made sure they were available. But when you're cooking for yourself, just try and think about what those safe foods are. Try and prepare for that time of moving out. As I start to wrap this episode up, I thought it's helpful to think about the pressures that are on young people in terms of how you're supposed to look, how you're supposed to feel. Also breaking away from, very safe home and that sort of thing, reaching out into the world. doing your own thing. There's a lot of psychological stress, emotional upheaval, anxiety-provoking situations. And I think probably in this age group more than any other, the gut-brain connection and the ability to tap into how you're feeling and how that's the knock-on impact on your digestion is really important to remember. I'm not saying that all IBS in young people is driven by anxiety or stress, but I think it has a strong role in exacerbating the problems. And so for those teenagers who do really struggle with IBS, this would be one of the first places I would look, is mood, anxiety management, and all the things that can help around getting better sleep, learning breathing techniques, learning how to manage your stress. Like, these are all very useful tools. And I would focus there a bit more first, rather than going straight into restrictive diets, cutting foods out, eliminating, for a whole range of reasons. But it's really hard to get the right nutrition that you need when your body is growing if you're on a restricted diet. Like we said before, it can also lead to too many rules around food, which might not be helpful as you're growing and developing. Mostly the symptoms are the same with teenagers. The treatments are the same, the causes are the same, everything's the same. I just thought it would be helpful to listen perhaps to some of the additional pressures that people are under at this stage of life. And if that's you, I wish you all the best with improving your digestion. Please do follow along for lots more tips on gut health, IBS diets, and all of those things. And you can follow me on Instagram. I'm goodnessme_nutrition. And you can get some advice there as well. So I'm going to leave it there for this week, but thank you for listening to this episode of the Inside Knowledge. Better digestion for everyone.